Welcome back to Spacecraft. This week we've got an extra special episode for you, part 1 of 2 episodes called the Supermoon Special. Let's get started. You're probably wondering, just what is a supermoon? Is it the specific moon that the bat signal from Batman can be projected on? Is it a special type of moon that gives us all superpowers? No, sadly. But it is a very cool type of moon. A supermoon is a new or full moon that coincides with perigee, or when the moon is closest to Earth in its monthly orbit, or within 90% of its closest point, which we calculate based on its apogee when it's farthest away from Earth. We have actually been enjoying a trio of full supermoons that began in March. We had our first one on March 9th, and then another one on April 7th, and we're about to have our third full supermoon in a row on May 7th. Now, this full moon is also known as the flower moon. Why is it called the flower moon? Now, it's hard to tell exactly where these names originated, but we think that they originated with an indigenous nation, the Algonquin people, whose territory is in the Ottawa Valley and across Ontario. The Algonquin people are part of a larger group of indigenous nations called the Anishinaabe, and we have them to thank for these very cool names for the full moon. Likely, European settlers who colonized the territory of the Algonquin people started using these terms as well until they were adopted more commonly across North America. However, across North America, there are different nations of indigenous people with different types of moon calendars. Close to where I grew up, which is now known as Vancouver Island, is the nation of the Wasanich people, and they had 13 different specialized names for the full moons that let them know when they should be doing different tasks throughout the year, and they all have very cool names. The May full moon, which coincides with our May supermoon and the flower moon, was called Penawin, or the moon for gathering camas. Camas is a very delicious plant with edible bulbs that grow beneath the ground, and it is the main source of starch in a traditional Wasanich diet. So in May, the Wasanich people know that they have to start gathering the camas plants, as that is the best time to do so. It was also a time from often moving from winter villages into spring villages, so it was also a time of travel. I like to think of it as a time for maybe camping or going back into the woods for the first time after a long winter of being inside. In addition to the names given to the full moon by indigenous people across North America, there are also other cultures with their very own names for all the different full moons. In Chinese culture, the May full moon is the dragon moon. So if you're feeling particularly fierce this month, it might be because of that. In Celtic tradition, it's known as the bright moon. So in addition to feeling fierce and flowery, we can also feel nice and bright in the month of May. So we know the upcoming supermoon is on a full moon, when the moon is nice and round and full in the sky. But what about the other phases of the moon? And why do we see all these wacky phases? Well, let's take a closer look. It takes the moon 27.3 days to go all the way around the Earth. But at the same time, the Earth is going around the sun, so it actually takes the moon 29.5 days to go through its 8 phases, a lunar month. The moon doesn't actually emit or give off its own light. All of the light coming from the moon is reflecting off the sun. When the reflection from the sun causes the moon to appear to be getting bigger, we call this a waxing moon. When the reflected light from the sun causes the moon to appear to be getting smaller, we call this a waning moon. The way I like to remember it is waxing. It's like we're putting more wax on the moon, making it bigger. And waning means that it's waning. It's wasting away. It's becoming smaller. From down here on Earth, it might look like the moon is changing shape, but it's not changing shape at all. Really, we're just seeing different amounts of the moon based on what parts are being lit up by the light of the sun. As for the 8 moon phases, first we have the full moon, when we can see a whole half of the moon, Then we have waning gibbous, an egg shape. Then we have our third quarter moon, and then our waning crescent. When the moon has completely disappeared and we can't see it in the night sky, that's called a new moon. And then we go back to our waxing crescent, our first quarter moon, our waxing gibbous, our egg-shaped moon, and then back to our full moon. You may have also noticed, while looking at the moon phases, that we only see one side of the moon. That's because the moon is tidally or gravitationally locked to the Earth in its orbit. It's kind of like when you are dancing with a partner and you have your arms stretched out like this and you're spinning around. That's sort of how the moon and the Earth dance around each other in the heavens. There's in fact a whole other side of the moon that we actually don't get to see. Now, it's often called the dark side of the moon because we never get to go over there, so it's mysterious and dark. But it actually gets lit up by the sun just as much as the side of the moon that faces us. So it's not really the dark side of the moon so much as its more scientific name, the far side of the moon. Now, this makes me wonder, what's your favorite moon phase? My favorite moon phase is the full moon, because it reminds me of spooky Halloween nights and werewolves and casting spells.
Moon. You made it. Welcome to the moon. Craft Commander Green here, just doing some meditating in this very soothing monochromatic moonscape. Monochromatic, that's a good word. Mono means one and chroma means color, so when you hear that term it refers to something that's different shades of the same color. And the moon is a bunch of shades of gray, which is very calming. However, down on Earth right now there's an explosion of color as we head into springtime. And spring is a great time to get inspired by all these wonderful color combinations that we're seeing as the flowers bloom. I also enjoy watching patterns emerge, not only in the flowers and leaves or on a butterfly's wing, but I also notice the other kind of pattern, cycles. I notice how the winter is turning into spring, and I also notice the moon phases. And I've always really loved watching the moon change throughout the month. However, I'll admit I didn't always understand the mechanics behind it. So to help out with this challenging concept, I've enlisted a few of my friends. First, I'd like to introduce you to the sun. Hi, sun. And now the earth. Hello, glad you can make it. And the moon. There you are. Now check this out. The earth is spinning quite fast compared to how slowly the moon orbits around it. And as the moon orbits around the earth, the light from our friend the sun illuminates different parts of the moon. The moon's a really dark place, no offense. And it needs the sun's light to reflect off of it like a mirror for us to see it. It's time for us to move on to our craft, and today we are making really adorable moon dioramas.
Hello Spacecrafters, today we're going to make full moon dioramas. So for this project you'll need a pencil, some scissors, a piece of black paper, a piece of white paper, a can, I'm using a tuna can, some felt pens, some white paint, you can use craft paint or gouache, and a paintbrush, some water, and a glue stick and a glue gun. If you don't have a glue gun, that's okay, but they are handy to have. So first we're going to create our background for the diorama, so I'm just using the can to trace out the size of my background. So I'm going to cut on the inside of the pencil line here, because you'll notice you need this circle to be just slightly smaller than the opening of your can so that it'll fit in and make a nice background. So you may have to trim the edges after just so it'll fit. All right, now we're going to make stars, and I'm going to use my gouache. And the trick here, no matter what kind of paint you use, you want to water it down quite a bit at first. Just need a little bit of paint here because we're just doing stars. But I'm going to water down a little bit of this paint, and so it's really watery. So this will help me create a glowing effect. What we're doing here is we're putting this first layer of watered down white paint, making my stars here. That looks sort of like a constellation. I'm making some stars big, some stars small, really random, little sort of groupings of stars to make it look more real. And because the paint is watered down, the paper will absorb some of that paint. So what you're left with are very faint, more transparent stars. So this will act as the glow. I'm going to wet my brush and then squeegee off the excess water and then sort of pick up some of that paint. So now you can really see that they're not super white, they're a little bit more gray. Now I'm going to get my paint with less water and I'm going to dab into the center of that more transparent layer. So the second layer is much more opaque. It's much brighter, and so this way these stars look like they're glowing. All right, there we go. So the next step is the moon. So I've already made one moon, but I'm going to remake it. I'm using just the bottle there to make the circle, and I'm filling it in really fast. Now I'm using graphic markers. I'm leaving some parts white just to represent some of the features on the moon. But these graphic markers are great because they're sort of like watercolors. They really sort of bleed together, and I think that looks pretty cool. So I'm using a darker gray here, but you can use any kind of felt pens. You could also use pencil crayons, you could use watercolor, and you make your moon, some craters there, and the Maria, which you'll learn about next week. Okay, and then once that's done, I'm going to use my thin black micron pen, and I'll really highlight the features of the moon. So I'm just making the Maria a little bit darker there. And now I'm quickly drawing some outlines and drawing some extra craters and features. And I'm doing this, very fast with lots of energy, which I think creates a nice illustrative look. All right, so here's our moon. And now we're going to just make a quick outline around it so that it's all done with the same technique. And there we have it. And then we're going to cut the moon out. So you'll see me doing this trick a few times, but really what I do is I hold my paper and I turn the paper so that it's doing a lot of the work, that left hand, which is sort of rotating the paper. Okay, on to the flowers. So these, as you can see, are very, very simple shapes. Nothing too fancy here, and you could make up your own. I highly recommend going out and looking at flowers that are blooming right now if you can, or maybe looking online at some references. And I'm treating these flowers the same way I treated the moon, with these quick, almost scribbly sort of marks with my very thin micron pen. I should mention this is a 005, that's the size, which is the smallest size you can get for that pen tip. Okay, there we go, my little daffodil. So with the flowers, I'm going to cut out each one so that it's easier to do this technique where I hold the paper in my left hand and I sort of turn the paper and I barely turn my scissors. And this way I can get around the edges. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can have some white of the page showing. You can always sort of trim it up afterwards. The next step is making this cute little sign that I'm going to put at the top of my diorama. But potentially, you could put this sign anywhere you like. I'm just creating the outline there. You can see it. And now I'm going to put in my text. I'm trying to space it out evenly, but as you can see, I didn't. Okay, so I'm just going to erase that and try again. And the trick here is to try to space out your letters evenly. Do it with pencil so that you can erase it and fix it. And now we can put our black outline over top. And there we have it. All right, I'm just going to erase the pencil line and my sign is ready to be cut out. Now that I've cut out all the different elements of my diorama, before I stick everything together, I'm going to work out my composition. So this is sort of fun because you can try a bunch of different arrangements with all of your pieces. And I like that one. So using hot glue, I'm putting the background into the tin can. Be careful because if you're using a hot glue gun, it can heat up the metal. The metal conducts that heat, so do be careful. I have a little drop of hot glue at the center. I'm letting it cool, and then behind my moon, I put a little piece of a toothpick so that the moon sort of sticks out from the background. Now using my hot glue, I'm attaching my flowers. And here we go. Just sort of figuring out where I want to put them. And voila, moon diorama. And I love the way these turned out. So I ended up making another one for the April full moon, which was the pink moon. It was a very beautiful full moon. And yeah, I think I'm going to do one for every full moon of the year. All right, Spacecrafters, it's your turn to make a moon diorama. If you post it, hashtag #SpacecraftMoonDiorama. Or you can send it directly to us. Our email's in the description below, and that way we can share it at the end of an episode. I'm sharing this incredible comet print made by Jack Bride. I love it so much. Thank you, Jack, for sharing. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Spacecraft, and come back next week when we learn more about the moon. Until then, stay curious and stay creative.